So good afternoon. We are here for what Shantae has officially dubbed as a podinar. Mm-hmm. Kind of a mix of our podcast, What's the Deal, for those of you who haven't seen it, and a webinar. And we get to talk today about a tool we're super in love with. And it gets at something we talk a lot about on the podcast.
Leadership. Yeah. And leaders and how they need to show up for organizations in order to have the impact that they want to have and create the change that they want to see in the organizations. And it starts really with them and the tools that they have to improve as leaders. So this conversation today is really going to be great in terms of providing a resource for leaders in order to improve as it relates to their own development.
Do we have any shared language?
Oh yeah, always. So
okay.
Yeah, this is going to focus again on inclusive leadership. And so we want to make sure that we're talking about it in the same way. So when we think about inclusive leadership, it really is an approach to leading the team, leading the organization that values diversity. And no, more so than just giving it lip service in terms of value, but really like using it and leveraging it as a way to get better performance out of teams, to impact retention and just the employee experience. It's a way of showing up that creates a space for everyone to feel like they can belong and give the best of themselves to whatever the work requires.
And as we go through, we talk a lot about, we do lots of surveys, we do lots of listening sessions, we listen to employees over and over, and the bottom line is people want to feel included.
Yeah.
They want to be seen, they want to be heard. So that means as a leader, when we say inclusive leadership, you're having to take action.
Mm-hmm.
And so two of the things that come out of that I know that we say all the time, is self-awareness and emotional intelligence. Mm-hmm. So when I think about Cloverleaf, which we're talking about today, it presents an opportunity to create better self-awareness, right? And so our guest will better describe the tool than we will, of course, because she helped create it. But the reason why we love this tool is that it gives daily tips to you about you and to you about someone on your team, which I think is for sure no other tool does that. And it's an easy way to become more self-aware. We're all very busy. We have lots on our plate. And if I'm saying to you, Shantae, you need to be more self-aware, you might just roll your eyes if you're busy. You're like, how am I going to do that? Right? I have a lot of work to do. Mm-hmm. So that coupled with the fact that you get tips about other people helps you to become more emotionally intelligent about how to deal with people who are different than you, who are coming at this work in a way that's different than you.
Right.
So you want to talk about who's joined us today?
Yeah, so we are excited to be able to talk to Kirsten Moorefield. Yes, I want to make sure I got that right. Kirsten is the co-founder of Cloverleaf, which bills itself as the largest coaching platform that helps to transform teams by being able to leverage these business insights and these behavioral insights. And Kirsten is fantastic. You're gonna really, really be attracted to her energy. She speaks a lot about diversity and psychological safety and everything from TED Talks to her own podcast. And she actually has a book. I want to make sure I get the book name out right. It's called Thrive, a manifesto for a new era of collaboration. And so it's such a great opportunity to talk to Kirsten about Cloverleaf and how Cloverleaf really does support diversity, psychological safety, inclusive leadership in organizations. And so really excited to have Kirsten here. So Kirsten, tell us more about yourself, whatever we missed, and then talk to us about Cloverleaf.
Well, thank you so much. I really am so thankful to be here. And so we invented Cloverleaf to really take the best of all these tools that people already invest in, such as, these assessments like DISC and StrengthsFinder and 16 types, and use them to help grow people's self-awareness in a way that's actually going to stick. I mean, Natalie, you joked, like, Shantae, if I say, hey, grow in your self-awareness, one, Shantae, you don't have time for that, but also, what does that mean? What do you do to do that, right? And so we've really built this tool in a way where we can slowly remind people, nudge them through 2-3 sentences a day to understand themselves better, and also to understand the people around them better. I'm very convinced about 99% of work conflict comes down to just miscommunication, because people are vastly different, and you can say the same thing and think it means 2 different things just because of the way that people are wired. So we just really wanted to, build a tool that can meet people where they are and help give them wisdom in small drips every single day to build our connection so that we can really do our best work together.
It's interesting because I have the exact same stat that I use, completely made up.
Yeah,
the 95% of workplace conflict. But it's actually not made up, because when I look across when I used to litigate, I still do internal investigations. Mm-hmm. We deal with a lot of workplace conflict. Yep. And the way communication has been breaking down in the workplace is like unbelievable, right? So I think it really highlights why tools like this are so critical. Can you talk to us a little bit about what problem you and your co-founder were hoping to solve for?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's really 2 ways to look at this. One is, just the problem we experienced, but also my philosophical take on why it was happening. So the problem that I experienced was I was leading a team, and I saw that, people were drastically differently motivated and responded to the same situation in very different ways. And also with the team I was leading, I was constantly advocating for, hey, I need these 2 people together on this team, but I need, these other 2 people together on a different team. And I knew that, everyone had great past performance, and I could take person A and put them with person B, and it would be fantastic. But I could also take person A and put them with person C, and it would be terrible. Not because person C is bad, but because the 2 of them could not figure out how to work well together, right? And so I used Myers-Briggs and StrengthsFinder to coach those teams and to try to figure out what was going on here. And ultimately, I just did not understand the difference between like T's and S's and J's and P's and all these letters and these things and these different titles for what your different strengths were and what that really meant at work. And so that was the problem I experienced, that really, my co-founder Darren said, hey, we could use technology to solve this problem. So that's why we started the company. But I think really deep down at the root of the philosophical problem we're trying to solve, not just, the solution of assessments, but the problem is that everybody knows what it feels like at work to feel judged. We all know that feeling of, I worked really hard, I pitched this thing and instantly shot down, didn't even get to slide 5 before someone started shooting it down. They must think I'm incompetent, or, they must just be a jerk, right? and we all know that feeling. And we also know that feeling of judging ourselves. Why didn't I think of that sooner? Why didn't I organize the slides better so that I could overcome that rebuttal? And we also know what it's like to judge other people. Like, that person just is a jerk. They interrupted me, right? And all of the swirling that happens, most of that is why, like you said, 95% of conflict is just miscommunication. But it's because we don't understand that, hey, that person is going to be really analytical and need a lot of details answered, or that person is going to be really bogged down by details. So don't go there too fast. There's going to be different ways that people are going to receive information that has nothing to do with if you're worthy or valuable, or they think you're competent or capable. It just has to do with the fact that we're wired differently. And if we can figure out how to leverage those things, not only do we overcome that conflict, but we also get to lean into each other's superpowers and not only do better work, but have meaningful and fulfilling relationships.
So many amazing
pieces to pull out.
I'd like to come back to the judging piece, but I realize that if people aren't as in love with Cloverleaf as us, they may not even know what we're talking about.
Right, yeah.
So do you mind just giving us sort of a breakdown of what Cloverleaf is and why we're having this conversation around you get to know yourself and people better that you work with?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we've built is, we call it automated coaching. So we use those grade assessments as the backdrop of everything that we do, and we take the data and we turn it into conversational coaching that arrives to people in the tools that they use every day. So it'll come into your Teams, your calendar, your Slack. It'll tell you, hey, you're going to meet with Shantae and Natalie today. Here, try this. This is a good way to persuade them. Or here's, something to be a heads up on, right? And then, let's say it sent me a tip on how to persuade you today. I could then click through and say, I don't need to persuade them. I need to, present publicly with them, right? And then it'll give me coaching on, hey, how are you going to present publicly? It's just going to help give me the information that I need in that moment. You can also go in and you can spin up dashboards that are about any group or team that you're working with, and you can understand what are these teams' strengths, what are their gaps, what are some blind spots we should be aware of, and you can go deeper in a bunch of ways from there.
So what I love about this tool is that almost all of us at some point in our career have taken some kind of assessment. I mean,
Yep.
I have taken Myers-Briggs, I've taken all these things, and a lot of times you're sitting there and like, oh my God, yeah, I am kind of like that. You're like, oh yeah. But then it becomes static.
Yeah.
Like you don't get a lot of feedback after you get the results. You don't get a lot of feedback about how to use it. And so it just becomes information you have. But the thing with Cloverleaf is it takes those same assessments that we're all used to taking a step further, right? By this idea of it's integrated into your calendar. That gets at what we talk about. Habits are little by little.
Yep.
How long does it take you to read your Cloverleaf every day?
Not long at all. It's seconds. And to me, the big part about that is just around the relationship management. Giving us tools because it is about the relationships that you have with your coworkers, your colleagues, your team members, whomever it is. And it's like, but how do we really manage those relationships effectively to get what we need to get out of them? And so I think Cloverleaf is amazing for that, because to your point, the daily tips about ourselves, like this is what's potentially going on with me. I always think it's like corporate astrology, or it's so spot on. It's like, did they consult with some stars and some, I don't know. But it's those tips are really spot on. And then when you are looking at it as in relationship to other people, it's fascinating, the things that can come up that you didn't even think about, that like, oh, right, I need to be mindful of this when dealing with this person, or, this person doesn't want a whole lot of detail. They want to understand the big picture, and then they can go and figure those things out. It's like having that knowledge is really helpful when you're working with people who are just so different than yourselves.
We send each other, all of us on our team send the tips. We're like, oh, kind of mood are you in? Seems on point, right? And it's a fun way too to team build. So not just be more self-aware and being thoughtful of your team, but it's also ways to have fun, because once you get used to reading them, you're like, oh, Shantae, you're in the mood today, aren't you?
Well, and one of the things that I love about this is that you both have said things we hear all the time from every user interview that I do, every single person that I talk to. They say two things that you just said. One is it's spot on, which is, that goes to the accuracy of our assessment partners, to the DISC and StrengthsFinder and those assessments. But number two, they say it's fun, which was not a design intention we had, but what you're laughing about of just people feeling known and knowing each other and sharing their tips with each other, they say it's fun, which is such, I think, a cool experience. And then the other thing that I'm really glad you're bringing up, which is, I think, really core to this conversation about leadership, we didn't build Cloverleaf for leaders. We built it for everyone. But what's been an amazing finding for those who use us in leadership development programs, and specifically for leadership efforts, is that typically leadership experiences give knowledge to a small percentage of the company that's like fast risers, right? But then it's on them to translate all their new wisdom and learnings to the people around them. And that's just a big burden on people who are already some of your top performers taking on some of your biggest responsibilities, right? With Cloverleaf, it's the same cost, it's actually less cost, and it creates this shared common experience where now everyone is growing in their self-awareness, and everyone is growing in their others' awareness, and everyone's having fun along the way. And that common experience not only helps the already highest performers, but it brings the whole community up.
That inclusiveness is something I like. I mean, well, certainly we talk about Cloverleaf as a way to build inclusive leaders, but the reality is that the tool itself is inherently inclusive because it can be helpful for any worker at any company, at any level, to build. Some of what we see is the breakdown in communications are happening at all levels, right? So like mid, lower, higher. So the fact that anyone can benefit from it is something I think is important. Which your thought?
Yeah, and I wish that people being people who can make decisions in organizations realize the benefit of that, right? Like it is, sometimes we see that it's limited to a certain part of the organization.
Yeah.
But there are benefits, and I think that the organization would be able to, in terms of impacting their culture, even at an even faster pace if they were to adopt this throughout all levels of the organization. Yeah.
So Kirsten, it's funny because you've talked about the fact that this wasn't for leadership development. You weren't necessarily thinking directly about inclusiveness. How did you come to be in this space? Mainly because I also know that you don't have a learning and development background. So I think for a lot of people, there's a side story here that you can do anything to put your mind to.
Oh,
People
yeah.
are like, what the heck are you doing?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't have a learning and development background. I managed a team, and I find it really fascinating, actually, and I could pontificate for hours on just the state of learning technology, but I actually think it's a great benefit that we didn't come in from that, because we were fully just thinking as operators outside the box of just what is it that technology can do to help relationships, because deep down, it's relationships that are making or breaking everything, your budget, your thing getting done on time, or even just how impactful the work is. And then also one of the other things I'm really proud of about Cloverleaf is, again, back to customer interviews, when I talk to people who use it, they'll often say some story of, I thought this person was a jerk, I got this tip, it helped me understand it, and then they'll translate that into something in their personal life. Like, it kind of also reminds me of my neighbor who has that weird tic, or my spouse, how they do this thing and I never understood it until this, or my sibling that I haven't talked to in a while, or, whatever it is. And I think that really, deep down, we've just built this thing to be about people and human relationships and the human experience. And I think that is why when it gets inside of an organization, it grows so quickly. And that's also why it's then called, the most effective learning tool inside the organization, or some other, it gets put in a bucket of some thing that we didn't even know to think about. We were just thinking about the people and that human experience.
So what are some of the best ways to use Cloverleaf? We have this amazing, powerful tool that allows us to get these insights on ourselves and other people. But if you were, say, coaching someone on using it, what would you tell them? It's the best way to do it.
I would say, bring your problems. I think the best time to use it is when something's not going well. I mean, that's usually how people learn to use it, right? Is when there's a conflict, or when there's your thing didn't get approved that you were pitching, or you feel like you got cut off, you got steamrolled, you didn't get listened to. Nobody around here listens to me. If you ever find yourself saying those things, you should get into the app and just say why isn't Shantae listening to me? Or why is Natalie so difficult to convince? Or whatever it is, you can just type in whatever colloquial words you would use, and it's going to give you insights that are going to be surprising to you. I mean, actually, one of the stories I love to tell is that in the earliest days of Cloverleaf, I wrote all of our coaching tips. And we just did it as a test. We probably had 100 in the system. There weren't a lot. And I said, well, we'll just try emailing to people. Everyone hates email. Nobody will really love this, but it'll give us a little bit of early data. Lo and behold, to this day, that email is still the most beloved feature, even though you can get it outside of the email. You can get it in your Teams. You can get it in your Slack. You can get it other places.
7:08 a.m. Eastern.
Yes.
Okay? Every day.
You know. So I got one of those emails right before I was going to meet with Darren, who's my co-founder, and we worked so closely together for years at this point. And I had been trying to convince him that we needed to hire for this one specific role, and he just kept saying we don't have the money, right? And so I got a tip that I wrote, but just in the context of this is what Darren is probably thinking. And it opened my mind to, I had just been saying this all wrong to him. So I had a meeting with him and I just reframed it. And I said, so what do you think we should do? And he said, I think we should hire for that role. And I said, hallelujah. You know what I mean? And I had started thinking like, he's not valuing me as his partner. He's not treating me as an equal. He's not listening to me. You know, like I had started going down that trail. So I think that really is usually the best time to start using Cloverleaf is like, you've got a conflict. You've got something that just feels so icky and uncomfortable. Just search for it in the app. And then the other best way to use it is just fully unintentionally. Just plug it in and you'll get the tips at 7:08 a.m. and it's going to surprise you with something that you didn't know you needed for that day, but it will build that relationship. It'll send Natalie the tip that she shares with Shantae and they laugh about together and they get to, and it sparks a new conversation. We've had stories of people saying, you know, person in this department got a tip about person in this department, which sparked a conversation, which sparked an innovation that now is like generating revenue for our business. Like it's unplanned, but it's just that human spontaneity of how people can come together. So I think those are two great ways. There's endless ways. You can also use it when you're starting a new team. It's new people, whether you're a new hire or it's just a new project team that's only going to last a few weeks, or you just got a reorg. I mean, how many reorgs are happening these days? You got a reorg with the layoffs. Like it's good for when there's change like that. I could go on, but I'll stop there.
I really love the stories aspect of this, you know, where if you don't have all the information about something, we default to these really wild stories about it's because they don't like me because of this, or it's this, or whatever, I'm Black, or I'm a woman, or I don't have a college degree, or whatever the fill in the blank is.
Yeah. We
make these stories up in our head. But what I love about this is that you can have information to dispel the stories. So it's not like it's a demographic or a characteristic that this person doesn't like, quote unquote. It's just you process things differently than they do, or they look at things differently. And it's getting to that part of it that's really exciting. And I think it will really help to quell some of the stickiness or the ickiness that happens in organizations around things that people can't control, like these demographic characteristics. But it allows you to really get to know people as they are, and then start to build relationships from that point, as opposed to just these different things.
Wow.
Yeah.
I was mesmerized.
Oh, thanks. It happens sometimes.
Because I think we talk about this a lot when we are coaching or advising leaders. We talk about the 4 agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz, which now has a 5th agreement. But one of those agreements is don't make assumptions. And the second one is don't take anything personally. And those 2 happen to be the most difficult.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Because we make decisions with tiny bits of information, so we assume, right? Like when I talked about discrimination cases I used to defend, they really boil down to not giving proper feedback. But because the person didn't get the right feedback and they got terminated and they weren't expecting it, they're filling in the blank, as you said. Oh, it had to be because I took FMLA leave or because I'm pregnant. And those things are possibilities, but more often than not, it's not actually what was happening. Like when you go and you dig in and you talk to people, it's what I didn't want to give her feedback because I thought she wouldn't take it well. And we thought we told her, or we thought she understood, or whatever the things that happen. And with Cloverleaf, it helps to close some of those gaps that happen of the guessing. I don't have to guess whether Shantae is going to have a tough time taking critical feedback. She doesn't, y'all. She's great at taking feedback. But I can go look in Cloverleaf and say, I need to have a tough conversation with Shantae. Like, what are some ways to approach it? And again, I think the thing that you all have done well, Kirsten, is that it doesn't take a long time.
Exactly.
So can you talk about that piece? Like that you've set this tool up in a way where it's not you don't have to spend hours and hours every day to get use out of it.
Yeah, I mean, who has time for that? I mean, that's exactly the problem we wanted to solve. Is as a leader, I knew that there were great insights inside of somebody's 40-page PDF report, but I didn't have time to go searching through it and then compare mine to theirs and understand like, oh, that's right, they're going to be more blunt and I want to know that they care about me, and that's why that's why they're not understanding the feedback. I think I'm being blunt and it's not blunt enough, or whatever it is, right? I didn't have time to go figure all of that out. So we've always intentionally focused on how can we come to you? How can we best understand your context so that we can come to you with what you need through, the email that comes at 7:08 a.m. or through the Slack that we send to you or through the calendar tip. But then also we know that technology is not going to understand all of your situation, no matter how smart it gets. So we want to make it real easy for you to click 2 buttons and then just type in whatever sentence it is that you're struggling with and then get feedback on that. We've built everything to be 2-3 sentences at a time. And we've also built it kind of honestly, like it sounds very conversational, but it's quite formulaic behind the scenes to make sure that we are helping you understand why this is happening and what you can do about it. And that why it's happening is like Shantae, you were talking about the stories we believe. So many of those are like 45 years ingrained into our brain, or however old you are, right? Like they come from early on and they got reinforced over and over and over and over. So of course we can't have some, leadership development workshop and unwire all of that. It has to be reinforced over and 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 over. And I mean, that story I told about myself and my co-founder, we had another huge disagreement and very tense moment this summer, like 2 months ago, because of the exact same, the way that I will present information and the way he will receive it. And then I just, at this point, I have to, recognize that more and more, but I still need that coaching with the person I work with most because it's so hardwired in both of us, right? So to your point of it doesn't take long and it's short, that's also very intentional because it needs to be over and over. It needs to be dripped. You need to be reminded. And you don't need to be reminded about everything every day. You need to be reminded about the things today that matter for you to be successful today, because that's what you're going to employ. That's what you're going to apply and use and try and fail and learn and tweak and then talk about, that's what is really then going to start rewiring your brain.
Yeah, it's really important because we talk about it as like a practice. Anything that you do, you have to practice in order to gain some sort of expertise, some proficiency, some skill level. And the beauty of how you provide the information allows us to practice that mindfulness. It allows us to practice being like slowing down, like, oh, right, okay, I do need to be considerate of this thing when I'm dealing with this person. Yeah. Otherwise, you're just speeding through your day and you're not taking the time to really consider who's some of these relationships are probably the most important relationships you have at work. Mm-hmm. And it's like you gotta nurture them in the same way you would maybe some of your personal relationships. And I think that this is a great way to do that.
I mean, an example there just happened over the weekend. Last week we had a tough work week. We have a lot of things going on at once that require a heavy amount of ability to hold space, a heavy amount of us using our empathetic listening. And there's certain things we weren't feeling too empathetic about. So by the end of the week, I felt like 2 of our team members had really endured like a lot of what I felt like was cruise ships shifting. Like it takes a lot to get a cruise ship to move. And we had a couple things last week that felt like we had to take sharp lefts. Yeah. So I was saying to Shantae, I'd like to recognize the team, and I'm not really sure how best to do it. Cloverleaf, she's like, get on Cloverleaf. And I'm like, right. So it's this idea where what I also think is important to keep in mind is something we say a lot to leaders as well is you don't have to have all the answers. No. If you start to feel yourself guessing and you have a tool like a Cloverleaf, it takes 2 seconds to go find an answer. So I think sometimes there's that piece. And I know we focus a lot on leaders because that's what we deal with a lot, but it's like where leaders start to get paralyzed because they're like, I don't know, I don't have all the answers. Mm-hmm. But this idea of it's just a little bit every day, we go ask for help.
Mm-hmm. I think another really important part about inclusive leadership is that your people will feel included in very different ways. So some people, like there's a woman that I work with who I go to her to poke holes in things because she's going to ask really, really good questions. And we had to kind of overcome a bit in her of that's been that's been penalized in her before of like, hey, why are you being so disagreeable? Why are you so negative? Why are you so pessimistic? Whereas I see it as, oh, you're a strong critical thinker, so you're going to see what no one else sees yet and be able to poke holes in things before we push it live, right? And, you know, we talked a lot about that. That's how she's going to feel included, is me taking something early to her and being like, hey, what do you think? Whereas I have other people who are like, can you just tell me what you are thinking? Like, don't bring it to me and ask me what I think. Like, that's mixed messages. That's so confusing. Like, can you just be a little more explicit, right? And that, like, in both of those scenarios, nobody's right or wrong. And I believe a lot of micromanagers are very well-intentioned. They're just presenting how they want to be led, which is with a little more help, with a little more instruction, with a little more clarity, with a little more hand-holding, right? I don't want to abandon you, right? Whereas other people are like, golly, can you step back? Can I breathe? Can I just like have some autonomy?
Your elbow up, like,
yes,
space.
Right. And if we could just have that conversation of, hey, what do you need? What do I need? And it's hard to just spark. I mean, you know, if I sat down with, for example, the woman who asked really good questions, if I just sat down with her 2 years ago and she started and said, hey, what do you need to be successful? She probably would have not said, I need to be able to ask a lot of questions. Like, because who knows what those things are, right? But having a tool that objectively pointed that out to both of us was super helpful. And that sparked the conversation so that I can know what does she need to do to be led versus somebody else. And what's going to not only make them feel included, but in that, what's actually going to get their best value, which is their most satisfying and rewarding work, which is going to lead to, you know, better tenure, better performance, better everything. But it's also like what's going to help us relate the best and enjoy our relationship the best and actually value each other as humans.
That piece around, it makes me think of like sponsorship programs when like we're trying to get proteges to like speak light into like what they're looking for in their career. And sometimes you don't know what you don't know, right? Like, and I think we hear that a lot from underrepresented people of like, you're asking me what I need, but I don't even know what it takes to be successful. But I think something small here that's huge that Kirsten's recognizing is that 2 years ago, this woman may not have known. It's like, I feel valued when stuff comes to me a little bit earlier and I can weigh in on it. So that opened up for me just even another thought around what we hear a lot is, there's no way to career advance, but maybe there's ways to unlock, you know, for that purpose.
Do you know?
It all breaks down to communication.
It does.
Sorry, what were you going to say, Kirsten?
I was going to say, you know, the other thing, though, is that one of the reasons why she often won't ask questions is because she thinks everybody already sees what she sees, right? We undervalue our own unique strengths. We think, you know, everybody could do this thing. And so we don't value it in ourselves, so we don't offer it. Because and also it usually is the same thing that kind of got like squashed down by those stories we tell ourselves, you know? So for her, you know, the negativity, pessimism, all of that. For me, it was strategic thinking. I always thought that was like laziness, that I just want to like take in information and process it. I was like, that doesn't help me get to inbox 0, or, you know, in school, it didn't help me write the paper. It didn't help me do the test well. It just helped me like want to take a nap. I don't know. You know what I mean? Like, I just like, there's nothing valuable about this. And I took StrengthsFinder when I was 23 years old, and I was so embarrassed by my results. And I'm grateful for that, because now, you know, I talk to a lot of people who are afraid of their test results, their assessment results. They're afraid of what people will think of them. And I can relate. I understand. I thought my strengths were all weaknesses. But because something objective pointed it out to me, it then set me on this, like, it kind of like created that, like, you know, what is it where you buy a blue car and then everyone has a blue car? It's like, it was pointed out to me. And so I saw it. I just started seeing it more and more. And that helped me over a decade. I mean, that was like 15 years ago. I'm still processing it. Like, how do I apply this? What can I do to bring my best to work? And as leaders, we have so much power to help our people figure that out in themselves, and then like use our words to tell them, hey, this was helpful, this was great, and then help them grow faster and faster in what they already have planted within them that is probably buried pretty far.
That's that go with the flow mantra. I mean, we've been talking about this a lot lately. I think if as a leader you feel like there's a lot of resistance, you're not unlocking the ways in which your team can best perform, right? Like if you're feeling this tight.
Yeah. You can use it as a way to kind of unlock some of that, which is nice. What I appreciated was the strengths-based approach, because that the resistance that you're feeling, or people not thinking that this thing, that superpower that they have isn't really a superpower. It's getting that information to really prove that, like you really, this thing is something that you're really good, and it's valued, because that's the whole point, right? Is that we want to bring these tools and we want to apply them so that we can show that we value people.
Yeah.
And seeing people and acknowledging them is like the best way to get someone to feel like they want to stay here and do some work. Because you know what? You see this as a strength in me. You want to encourage this in me. And now we have language around it, which is really, really, this is what Cloverleaf really allows us to do. Yeah.
So many good conversations.
So, sorry, there's a little bit of a delay in the sound. So Kirsten, if you're on Instagram, you're going to come across at least one meme where someone is talking bad about their job and a leader. Right?
Oh, yeah.
And so what are your reactions when you see some of that, knowing the tool that you all have? I mean, I see them all the time, like, we don't want a pizza party, we want to be paid right. Leaders ask you what they think and they don't really actually care. How do those things show up for you when you see them?
I mean, I think it's kind of, I have a lot of reactions to all of that. I think it's sad, first and foremost. I think it's sad because I do think that a lot of people try to speak up and don't feel heard. And so I think that's very sad. I think then turning to social media and just creating a negative culture around it is unproductive. So I think that's all kind of sad. But I mean, I think that, so while I say I think 95% of conflict comes from miscommunication, I do think that a lot of it comes from like people with good intentions doing things that just come off the wrong way, right? So like, for example, leaders, I definitely believe there's terrible leaders out there. We all have experienced it. We all have experienced it. So I'm not giving, the excuse for everybody who I don't know, right? But I do think that, for example, the more that people rise, the more that they get into leadership positions, the more disconnected they get from the bottom, right? Yeah. The day-to-day work, it just has to happen. You have to understand market data. You have to understand trends. You have to understand P&Ls. You have to understand higher level things so that the lower level work can work. But if this doesn't ever connect, like if these folks cannot understand each other, be curious about each other. I think that's really the thing that's missing, is curiosity. And I genuinely think it goes both ways. I think that we put a lot of pressure on the leaders to be the curious ones, which they better be. And if they're not, that is truly a horrible problem for the whole organization. But everybody has a role to play in this, right? Like everybody does. In my early career, I was in an organization where people complained to me. I was like 22. They complained to me all the time about how they were underpaid and they were overworked, and they would even drink alcohol to fall asleep at night, and they would, whine to me. And I said, oh my gosh, we got to do something about this. So I went to my boss's boss. I talked to him, and he had a meeting, and he said, okay, let's talk about your capacity. I hear people are feeling really over capacity. So tell me, like, if 100% is like, I cannot take anything else, like I am really, really pushing it. If 110 is like, okay, I'm drowning, and like 90 is like, I'm good, but I could probably take a little more. Tell me where you're at. Around the room, the average was probably like 75. People said they had more capacity. And I was like, I don't understand this at all. And I think that, I think there was fear involved. I think there was fear for jobs. I think there's probably a more psychologically safe way that leader could have gone about that conversation. But what I learned early in my career is like, people will talk to each other and complain, but not go to the places where they can actually make a difference, because it's scary. It's really scary. So I think when you see, like when you're at a barbecue with somebody and they complain about a coworker, or you're on Instagram and you see people, throwing shade at something, I personally just want to like inject a little bit of curiosity every time. I always just want to ask a question that's like, and I don't know the situation, right? I don't know, and I'm not going to fix anything, but I do want to ask a question that'll at least make people think or inspire them to go to somebody in power or use the autonomy and the agency that they do have within themselves to do something about it. And that's actually like secretly one of the things it's not a secret, but I think like subversively, I would say, I'll talk about it all the time publicly, but it's one of the things I'm so excited about with Cloverleaf is that when you get those small drips, when they are so accurate and when they do spark those conversations between people, you bring that together and you have these small little like glistening light, just little flickers throughout the workplace every day of like, oh, we can be maybe there's a different way of seeing that conflict. Maybe there's a different way of seeing that person. Maybe there's a different way of seeing myself in this situation. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that like small drip is what really has the power to change culture, not only inside an organization, but even more broadly speaking for our global culture of people throwing shade on social media, not really actually being able to make a difference by doing that other than just spread negativity, right?
Right.
I think it brings us to the concept of trust, right? So if you're thinking about, we have a tool that has objective assessments in it that have had many, many different scientists in it. So does it matter what background you're coming from? If you're answering the questions honestly, like you could be from a completely different place, religion, ethnicity, and have the exact same profile of someone completely different than you, right? So that it's an interesting thing there in terms of being able to see commonalities. But I think the trust piece is, okay, I can trust the tool, the information feels accurate, I relate to it, so you can build the trust in the tool, and then that allows you to start to build trust with your coworkers, because if you take the feedback seriously.
That trust thing is interesting, because we've also seen where folks want to like buck the feedback that they get. Like they don't like it, so they push against it. And there is an element of trust there where it's one, do I trust the tool, and do I trust my coworkers or colleagues to know this about me?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And what are they going to do with this information? Mm-hmm. So how do you address that, Kirsten?
Oh, yes. Okay, so very intentionally, I'm a little passionate about it. We know that we are reaching people in the workplace where your paycheck's on the line, where your reputation matters, where I wish there were no politics, but there's a lot of workplace politics, and a lot of people would say they work in a toxic culture, right? Mm-hmm. We know that. And so when we are building our coaching that's going to come to folks, we make sure if it is visible to others, so if it's, a tip about Shantae that's going to Natalie or going to somebody else, that I always like want to pressure test it and say, like, if Natalie was mad at Shantae, is this going to be fuel on the fire, or is this going to spark curiosity and open her mind? Like, and I even was just reviewing some tips that we were building this new way of building, more data points into our tips, and we were QAing some of them, and I was like, ooh, this word, what was the word? Subjective. It said that so-and-so may be subjective in their opinions. And I was like, that sounds like if I didn't like so-and-so, I would be like, that's right. That's why I never take anything they say seriously. So like, we're very, very intentional about what is coming out. All of our tips are human reviewed multiple times. Even though we use AI to help, crunch the data and put everything together, we make sure that it goes back to the research and it's accurate, and we human review it for that, toxic culture test. Because, people don't need any more help towards the negativity. They need help towards the positivity, right? And then we will, however, create tips for you individually that is going to help you see your blind spots, and that sometimes people say it stings a little bit. But we're not sending that out to the public. Like, this is for you to be able to grow. And we are very receptive to feedback that we get on that, but people generally say, like, that I needed that sting. That was really helpful. I learned something new. And so discomfort isn't bad, but throwing fuel on potential toxic fires is what we're really intentional to avoid.
Oh, we could keep going, but we've skipped past asking if people have questions. So I will say, if you have a question, please drop it in the comment. Oh my gosh, as you probably could tell, we could talk to Kirsten about this for like 7 more days.
Yeah.
Because there's so many uses for it. But we'll gosh, Kirsten, thank you, because this has been, it's opened my mind on even more, and I already am like loving the thing.
Yeah. No, this has been wonderful. And I think it's just helpful for folks to know you don't have to know all the things, to the point that you said before, and you have tools and resources that are out here to help you.
And do you know how many times Kirsten has used your word, girl? Curious?
Curious. That's my favorite
Yeah.
word.
She's always like, let's get curious.
I'm curious to know.
Yes. Well, and by the way, that is a phenomenal opener when you really disagree with somebody. When you're like, what the heck was that? You just say, I'm curious. Walk me through your thought process on blah.
That one. That one.
Start it with,
That question,
curious.
exactly.
Yes, it is so helpful.
Kirsten, when Shantae gets curious, you feel really dumb. She doesn't try to make you feel dumb, but you're like, oh, damn it, that was so easy. I could have. Oh.
But that gets you to the, like, you're judging yourself, right? Like, she's showing her strength, and you're like, gosh, why am I not more like her?
All right,
No,
well,
I
we
wouldn't
appreciate
recommend that at all.
you. And everyone who joined today will be back probably in Q1, because we got a lot going on and for the rest of the year. But Kirsten, such a great partner. Everyone who works at Cloverleaf is as awesome as Kirsten, by the way. So they've been an incredible partner, and we cannot encourage you enough to explore them. But thank you, and have a wonderful
Kirsten.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I seriously, I think the work you're doing is incredibly important, and then the way that you approach it with curiosity. I've only gotten to know you a little bit, but the little bit I have gotten to know you and what my team tells me about you, you are doing the work. So thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of it today.
Thank you so much.
Bye.